Good afternoon, two ladies and many gentlemen. My name is Tey. I'm the founder of Tykn.tech. Actually, this green carpet is where we started. I didn't know we're gonna do the meetup at the Jaarbeurs. But 2 years ago, I was standing right on this spot, pitching at Startup Weekend the idea of registering academic certificates on a blockchain technology to prevent fraud and prevent permanent loss. So it's nice to be back. My co-founder is here, Jimmy Snook, and my other co-founder is coming. I met him actually also in the Jaarbeurs. He was one of the other competing teams. Tykn is a tech for good company, and we work in the identity space. We cater for NGOs and their partners like healthcare institutions, microfinance institutions, and many more. I want to take you today to your childhood a little bit, and I want to ask you do you remember the place where you were born? Where were you born? What's the name? Okay. Anyone born in Utrecht? Nice. That's my passport. Under my place of birth, what is written? Okay. Nothing. It's unknown. Of course, I know where I was born, not in Utrecht. I was born in Kuwait. It's a country in the Gulf region, known for its oil wells. But my father doesn't own oil wells. During 1990, the Gulf War, the birth registries got destroyed. Neighboring country Iraq invades Kuwait to take its oil resources, and in that process, the Kuwaiti government decided to burn their own registries so that the information and the data will not fall in the hands of Iraqi army, and the Iraqi army can carry persecutions against the people. So during that event, the birth registries got destroyed. There were even some central bank ledgers that were burned, and employees of the central bank, when the war started, they strapped the records around their waist and start walking deep in the desert. These are facts that came out of the Gulf War in 1991. It didn't affect me personally because at birth I was registered. I was 5 years old when the Gulf War started and my family fled to Lebanon. But similar to my case today, there are 290 million children under the age of 5 that lack this document at birth. That means they are born unregistered and they grow unregistered. So what does this mean? This means they will lack access to basic human rights, education, healthcare, money. On top of that, they will be vulnerable to trafficking and child labor. And remember, this is just under the age of 5. On a global scale, we have more than 1.2 billion people undocumented. We have 1.7 billion unbanked. We have 640 million under the age of 16 without birth certificates. So the problem is obviously huge and at scale. But if we look at the root cause, why is this happening? What are the barriers? Whether it's a geographic barrier, the family is living far away from the registry, or an economic barrier, the family doesn't have money to pay for the registration of the children, although they live door to door to the registry, or simply a technological barrier. In many countries, there is not proper infrastructure, registration systems, identity systems to offer identification for their citizens. So the root cause of the problem in this world that we live in the digital age, where the largest economy on earth is the internet, the most visited place on earth is the internet, we still use paper-based documents. So today we can move $0.000001 across the globe, 24 hours, 365 days in a year, since 10 years. non-stop, or what is known as the Bitcoin protocol. But when I want to share my age, or when I will share my first name or my last name, this is a total different process that doesn't match the reality we live in today. So obviously we say, yes, let's go digital. We need a digital identity. And that's what we thought of in the beginning, until we realized that digital is not enough. There are another two characteristics that we need to add to identities today in their basic form. It needs to be portable. That means I can carry it from one place to another. But most importantly, it needs to be private and secure. And that's what we do at Tykn. We bring portability, privacy, and security to digital identities. We are a tech for good company. We started in 2017, and we help NGOs and their partners onboard their beneficiaries, similar to a KYC process that a bank does. We help those institutions to know about the refugees they are helping, and to help those refugees carry a digital credential, a global verified credential that will allow them to access digital services, that will allow them to communicate between each other and between the institutions or the camps they live in a secure way, and most importantly, reduce the paper trail in refugee camps. Part of my journey as a person with no place of birth, although I know where I was born, it wasn't enough to just carry that label. I had, or what we say, destiny made me live the life of the invisible man. So in 2014, I applied for asylum in the Netherlands. Yes, I was born in Kuwait, but I'm not Kuwaiti. I come from Syria, Damascus. And in the asylum process from 2014 till 2016, I went back to Den Haag with 14 kilograms of paper, because I moved between 5 refugee camps, and at every camp I have to be identified again and again and again. So having such a solution for refugee camps and NGOs specifically will, of course, have many benefits, but the most important is the privacy and security. And why is that? Why do we focus on that point for refugees? Because if any of you lose his credit card or his passport today, the process basically is easy to get it back, and there is no direct harm on you. But imagine we breach, or a list of Rohingya refugees in Myanmar is released into the public. That could put the life of the people on the list in danger. So as between a normal European Dutch citizen and a refugee just coming to a European country, we value our privacy a lot. The magic that happens on our solution is derived from the decentralization of what we call the blockchain technology, and specifically the sovereign technology. And why is that? Because what we believe in, the data must never be registered on a public chain. It needs to be offline on the device, but the signatures that identify organizations need to be immutable, they need to be fraud-proof, and we need to check their authenticity anytime, at any day. And that's why we went for Sovereign as a platform, or as a technology that not only offers the standards in emerging identity standards, and doesn't only offer a good and important secure features on how the network communicates, but most importantly also the recognition from governments, from international organizations, from banks, telecom partners, airline agencies. They all came together in a consortium style of partnership, collaborations, to bring self-sovereign identities for everyone and not only for refugees. In the end, what I always carry as a message for everyone in the room, why does it matter for you? Refugees are not among us. We barely have contact with them. We need to go to work tomorrow. So what is then for you? Two things. The United Nations has set a set of goals to help you guys basically survive in the future. And they're called UN SDGs, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the purpose of these goals is to improve the livelihood of man, animals, and the environment, including plants and the climate. Are we achieving those goals? No. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the numbers of invisible children are increasing. The earth temperature is increasing, and we are doing politically much less than it is needed to provide a better future, not only for you, but for your children. So the refugees of the future, he will not be Ahmad from Syria or Qasim from Eritrea. It will be Jan, Janneke, and the Dutch people in first. I don't want to explain to you why. Just the word lowlands or Netherlands by itself is enough. We live underwater, and any drastic change in the world temperature will make us swim. So we've seen that in Italy, we've seen that in Paris, we've seen that in the Netherlands. The longest drought seasons are here, and it is supposed to be the longest hot summer here. So are we going to wait for UN SDGs? Are we going to wait for the UN to take action? When we came to this room 2 years ago, the decision that we came with is we're not gonna wait. And we live by a code, and that code is innovation without permission. Do not wait to take permission to do something good and to innovate. And when you're doing your work, always mix the profits with the impact. And that's how the blend of success can come out, and that's how I think we can be stronger than the UN SDGs, and we can solve and tackle the world's pressing problems. My name is Tey, and I am the invisible man, and I thank you for your audience. Yeah.
And then the other one, he's good to go.
Yes. That's for you.
Yep. Use this. It doesn't matter what we do.
Needs to go, yeah, but it needs to go this way. But I don't want to break it, so we'll try this. There we go. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you. Thanks for coming out on a nice sunny evening and spending your time indoors with us. I'm going to talk today about an identity metasystem, which is a little bit of an esoteric concept, but I hope by the time I'm done, it'll make some sense to you. As was mentioned, I'm the chair of the Sovereign Foundation. Sovereign Foundation is building a global identity system, which I'll explain a little bit what it does. As Tey mentioned, the problem online is that not only doesn't anyone know that you're a dog, as this famous New Yorker cartoon points out, but on the internet no one knows your address or your phone number or your birthday or anything else about you reliably. It's nearly impossible to prove to somebody remotely something about yourself. Now, sometimes that's good. It's nice to be anonymous, but there are lots of use cases where it would be nice if we could prove things about ourselves to other people. The reason for that is because the internet was created without an identity layer. Actually, it does have an identity layer, but it's all about machines and services, right? It has IP addresses and it has ports. Those are how we identify things on the internet. You don't have an IP address or a port. You don't have either one of those. So we don't have identity on the internet. This is Kim Cameron. He's Microsoft's Chief Identity Architect. He's been there at Microsoft for a long time. Kim is a being from the future. What I mean by that is in 2004, Kim formulated ideas about how a decentralized identity platform could be built that just now people are starting to understand. So he was way ahead of his time. He wrote a whole paper about it called The Laws of Identity, which you can Google, but rather than read that, I broke it out into some bullets. So what is a metasystem? A metasystem is an encapsulating protocol with a unified user experience. An identity metasystem allows people to select the appropriate identity provider and features for whatever they're trying to do. Right? So those first two bullets, you might look at those and think, hey, that sounds kind of like the web, or it sounds like the internet. And that's exactly right, because the web and the internet are both examples of metasystems. The internet is a communications metasystem that gives you an underlying infrastructure that you can build any communication system on top of. Kim talks about this system being polycentric, which today we would say decentralized. And he talks about it being polymorphic, meaning that there can be multiple, what he called claims, but we now call credentials. And I'll explain how credentials work in just a second. So in short, what we're trying to do is build a global, decentralized, public identity system, a utility that everybody can use for whatever purpose they have in mind. Not something that is designed for a specific purpose, but something that's designed to support any identity system that you care to build. Okay. You're familiar with how identity works today, right? Companies like Amazon create an identity system. We call these administrative identity systems because they're designed to administer identity within a particular domain or context for a particular purpose, in this case, Amazon's purpose. You may like to think that you have an Amazon ID, but in fact you don't have it. Amazon has it and they lend it to you because they can take it away from you at any time and you have no recourse. That's true of almost every so-called identity that you have online. And the problem, of course, is you don't just have one, you've got dozens, maybe even hundreds of these. Hence the popularity of password managers that allow us to manage all of these credentials that we use to prove to companies over and over and over again that we really are the same person who signed up. Okay? Now, in the physical world, identity doesn't work like that. I don't know exactly how it works here in the Netherlands, but in the US, if you go to a pharmacy or a drugstore and you want to pick up a prescription and they say, oh, we need to know you're over 18 in order to pick up this prescription. In the US, we pull out a driver's license. You pull out an ID card, what do you do? Yeah, same kind of thing. So I was the CIO for the state of Utah for a couple of years. And the driver's license division for the state of Utah insisted that they were not in the identity business. They didn't want any part of the identity business. They were licensing drivers. That's what they did. And yet, pharmacies, bars, all kinds of places use the driver's license as a fundamental, foundational ID document. They're using it out of context, right? It's not being used for its original purpose. Why does this work? There are two reasons. One, we trust the driver's license division to do a reasonably good job of checking all of the identity data. That process is called proofing. Right? So they proof the identity. And so we know that what the driver's license says that your birthday is such and such a date, it's probably such and such a date. Second thing that makes this work is they package it up in a nice tamper-evident package. It has a sophisticated biometric device on it called a pitcher that people can look at and say, yes, this is the same person who this driver's license belongs to. And so it works great, and people use it all the time. We don't do this online. We have no way of doing something like this online. In the physical world, what we have is something we might call a multi-source identity system, meaning you don't just have a single credential from a single place. You have lots of credentials. Some of them you carry around in your wallet with you. Some of them you keep in filing cabinets at home. Some of them you might put in a safety deposit box. You've got lots of credentials from lots of places. You use them either alone or in combination to prove things about yourself to people, right? So I learned a Dutch word today, hypotheken, right? So mortgage, if you're getting a mortgage, right? Think of all the credentials and all the things you have to prove to somebody when you get a mortgage. So how does this work online? What we want is we want to create a digital credential that works online the same way credentials work in the physical world. So these are called verifiable credentials. There is a W3C standard for verifiable credentials. This is what Tey was talking about when he was talking about credentials, talking about these W3C standard credentials. And so in this system, a credential issuer, say your employer, can give you a credential and it goes to the person. The person holds it, just like the state gives me my driver's license and I carry it around in my wallet. My employer can give me my ID credential and I can carry it around in my digital wallet. Let's say I then show up at the bank and I need to prove to the bank that I'm employed and I make a certain amount of money so that they'll give me a loan. I can use the credential that my employer gave me to prove to the bank that I'm employed and make over a certain amount of money. And I can do this without the bank having to talk to my employer. This is important for two very good reasons. One, first is practical. Right? The practical reason is if the verifier had to talk to the issuer, that would mean that every issuer of credentials, no matter how small, has to run a 24/7 service that is always ready to accept a query from some verifier. And of course, as Tey said, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the Kuwaiti government actually destroyed the birth registration, meaning that a verifier can't possibly go back to the issuer and determine whether or not this credential is true. So we don't want to have to do that. We want the verifier to know that the credential is authentic without talking to the verifier. The more important reason is privacy. You may not really care if your employer knows that you're at the bank getting a loan. You may not necessarily want the government to know every time you step into a bar. There are lots of reasons why we don't want the credential issuer to know where we're using credentials. So there are 4 checks that the verifier does when they receive a credential. The first check they want to do is to make sure that the credential was issued by a certain institution. They want an identifier for the institution. Second check they make is they want to know who it was issued to. Was it issued to the individual who's presenting the credential to me? Third check is they want to know whether the credential has been tampered with. And the fourth check is they want to know if the credential has been revoked. So these are 4 important checks that every credential verifier wants to know about a credential when they get it. Now, this system is decentralized and has some very important properties. First of all, there's no central authority telling the credential issuers what credentials can be issued and which credentials can't. Every organization, every person can make their own decisions about issuing credentials and what they want those credentials to be and how they want them to be used. Every identity owner can make their own decisions about what credentials they want to hold, what credentials they want to present, and how they want to manage the credentials they have. And finally, every credential verifier makes their own decisions about who they trust. Now, this is an important question, because earlier I said that the credential verifier makes 4 important checks, and I said they want to know the identity or the identifier for the credential issuer. But in fact, they may want to know a lot more than that. They don't just want an identifier. They want to know, should I trust this credential issuer? So how does this work in the physical world? Well, there's lots of different ways that it works, but one way it works is we have institutions which do this kind of thing. If you have a certificate, a graduation certificate from a university in the Netherlands, and you bring it to me in the US, and you want to apply for a job, I may not have ever heard of the institution you graduated from. How do I know if it's a real university or not? Well, I might look it up online. I might ask some other people. Or if I really want to know, there's an accrediting body that accredits universities in the Netherlands. And I could go check with them and see, is this university accredited? Is the computer science program that you graduated from accredited? So there are institutions and ways we already have of doing this. We can apply those exact same processes online. So it already works, right? So we have governance authorities like the accrediting body in the Netherlands for universities, and they can also issue credentials to credential issuers. And when you connect to the credential issuer, you can ask them, tell me who you are, and give me credentials that prove things about yourself. Now there are 4 technologies that make this work. The first one we've been talking about, verifiable credentials, and I mentioned that that's a W3C standard. The second one is a system of peer-to-peer agents. So these credential exchanges that are happening peer-to-peer between agents running on behalf of individuals and organizations. The third thing is something called a decentralized identifier. And a decentralized identifier is a way of essentially finding something on a particular blockchain, and that's the fourth thing. Now, the blockchain does not have identities on it. Right? So your credentials are not on the blockchain. What is on the blockchain is the credential definition. So when you present a credential to me, I can look up the credential definition on the blockchain. The credential definition tells me the schema for the credential, it tells me the decentralized identifier of the issuer, and it gives me the location of the revocation registry so I can determine whether or not that credential has been revoked. So those are the things that go on the ledger. So to give you an idea of how this scales, the governments of British Columbia and Ontario, 2 provinces in Canada, have issued almost 10 million business registrations on Sovereign. They wrote 7 entries to the ledger. 10 million credentials, 7 entries to the ledger. There's 1 schema, 2 credential definitions, 2 public identifiers, and 2 revocation registries. That's all they wrote. 10 million credentials. So we can put this all together in a stack, right, in order to create interoperability between multiple projects and partners. Number 1, the bottom layer is what we've been talking about, this ledger and the decentralized identifiers on top of it. Decentralized identifiers provide an interface that allows us to loosely couple the credential exchange process to a particular ledger. So when you give me a credential, I can look at the DID in it, and I can look that up on Sovereign. I could look it up on Ethereum. That's what DIDs do, is they allow us to look up identifiers on different ledgers. We have this agent-to-agent, peer-to-peer agent protocol that I was talking about. That's the second layer. And we can think of these 2 as forming a layer of cryptographic trust. Remember those 4 checks that I told you about that every credential verifier wants to do? That's what this layer does. It ensures that you can do those 4 checks. Now on top of that, we have this credential exchange that we've been talking about, where holders, verifiers, and issuers interact in a decentralized way. And as we talked about, I may want to know whether, if I'm a verifier, I may want to know whether I can trust the issuer. So there's a 4th layer, which is whatever governance process is necessary to do that. We can think of that as a layer of human trust, because humans are deciding what credentials to issue, whether they trust those credentials, why they trust them. Right? That's not a cryptographic question. That's a question of business process and other things that humans do. Now, I'm going to click the button, and these labels on the left-hand side are going to shift. You can see it now says Identity Metasystem and Context-Specific Identity System. What I mean by that is this bottom layer forms the means for anyone to create any specific identity system that they're interested in or is important to them. So if I'm interested in doing university degrees, if I'm interested in doing credentials for refugees, if I'm interested in doing employment credentials, if I'm interested in doing supply chain credentialing, any of those things would be this top blue layer. But they all ride upon a common infrastructure that is the identity metasystem underneath. So I'm going to show you a short video in just a second, just so you can see how this works. But if you want to try it yourself, you can go to iiw.vonix.io, and that'll show you how to download the Street Cred app, which is a digital wallet. And I think it's all still operational. You can probably get your email verified. You won't be able to get an IIW credential because you didn't attend Internet Identity Workshop. But you'll be able to get your email verified and know that you have an email. And then you can use that to connect to other people like me. And what happens is when you do that connection, you get you exchange decentralized identifiers. And decentralized identifiers have associated public-private keys. Now in the app, you're never going to see keys. You don't ever deal with keys. I'll show you in a second what you see. You see connections and you see credentials. Those are the artifacts that you see. But you can use those keys to create a messaging channel, and that's what this app does. So it not only does credential exchange, but it creates a peer-to-peer messaging channel, which is mutually authenticated and secure based on that cryptography. There's also this try.connect.me. This may not be available in the Netherlands yet, but I think it'll be available within a week. All right, so let me show you this brief video and show you what this looks like when you're actually doing it. Now, this is an old video. It's probably about a year old. The user interface is a little different, but the idea is very much the same. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see a phone over on the right-hand side. It's not there yet. That phone is the property of somebody named John Smith. And John Smith is going to interact with Sky Airlines. Now this browser that you see open is Sky Airlines. In real life, Sky Airlines would not be typing things into the browser, obviously. They'd have this connected to their back-end systems. But for purposes of the demo, that's what it looks like. So you can see there's the phone. He's going to launch the ConnectMe wallet. Okay, so that's the ConnectMe wallet, and you can see that he has 3 connections in here. So he's going to connect to the first one. You can see that's Resolute Telco. He's connected to them, and he has received a mobile statement. Bank, he's received a bank statement. And then finally, driver's license division, he's received a driver's license. Now, what's going on here? He's got a digital wallet. It has 3 connections to 3 different entities, and he's received a credential from each of them. Now, he could have received multiple credentials. So, for example, this just had 1 mobile statement in it. But if his mobile company is really giving him his mobile statements as credentials, he'd have one for every month or however often they issue them, right? So he could have lots of credentials in this wallet. So now he's going to go to Sky Airways or Sky Airlines, and he wants to buy a ticket. So Sky Airlines is going to create a connection for him. In real life, this would either be online, or it might be at a counter or something else. But he's going to see a QR code here. And he's going to scan that with his phone. And it asks him, hey, Sky Airlines wants to connect to you. And he's going to say, continue. And so now he has a connection to Sky Airlines. Okay? So you can see now he has a fourth connection there to Sky Airlines. Okay? So now Sky Airlines is going to do its account provisioning process. It's going to ask him for some information. Okay? So it's going to request information from him, and the information it's going to request, you can see here they're going to select it, is passenger information. Okay? And it's asking for his name and his phone number and driver's license and other things. Okay? So now you see what's going on here. He's connected to Sky Airlines. Sky Airlines has asked him for information, and the Connect Me digital wallet that he has is automatically choosing different credentials that he has to answer this query. So you can see over on the right-hand side the icons for the bank and the telco and the driver's license and other things. And he could swipe and choose different credentials to answer those queries if he wanted, but he's able to answer that. So he's going to say send, and when he does, that's going to go back to Sky Airlines. Okay, so it's sending, successfully sent. So over here on the left, you're going to see that Sky Airlines has this information. So it's received. Now you can't see it probably, it's very faint, but you'll see that there are green checks next to all of these. Those are those 4 checks I talked about. Those green checks mean that for every piece of data in here, Sky Airlines has checked to know who issued the credential, that it was issued to John Smith, that it hasn't been tampered with, and it hasn't been revoked. So they know all of those things automatically through the software. And you'll notice that John Smith has a record of what he shared with Sky Airlines. Right, so he automatically gets a receipt of everything he shared. So now John Smith wants his ticket. He wants a boarding pass. So Sky Airlines is going to create the boarding pass. And again, this is not something that would be done by somebody typing it into a browser. It would be connected to the back-end system and be done automatically. In fact, one way to think about credential exchange from an organization standpoint is an input-output process. It doesn't change the back-end system. It's just a new way of getting information in and out of that system. Okay. So just about done here. He's got a seat. He's got a destination, Salt Lake City to Long Beach. And they're going to offer this to John Smith. So they'll click that. And now what's going to happen over here on the right-hand side is you'll see that John Smith is being offered a boarding pass. And he's going to accept that boarding pass. And now when we click on the Sky Airlines connection, you can see that's pending, and pretty soon it'll be received. There it is. And so there's the boarding pass. So he now has this boarding pass. This is a digital credential in John Smith's digital wallet that he could now take to passport control or the security lane, and along with his passport or driver's license or whatever other identity document he has, be able to prove to them that he is John Smith, that this was his ticket, and use his digital wallet to go through passport control if that was accepted. Yes.
So the next time he wants to buy something else, for instance, television online, can he then use the information from Sky as another identity?
Yeah,
Proof of identity?
he can.
So it's sort of self-expanding.
Yes.
Eventually, when it's trustworthy, he's self-expanding.
Yeah, and in fact, let's say that he flies Sky Airlines all the time, right? Sky Airlines could, rather than have a built-in loyalty program that they have to keep track of, they could just tell John Smith, if you can prove to us that you've flown over 50,000 miles in the last 12 months, we'll give you a 50% discount on your ticket. I don't think airlines are going to do that anytime soon, but it's perfectly possible for a merchant, for example, to issue every receipt as a verifiable credential and then use those in a loyalty program using the verifiable credential exchange. So yeah, all of these build up and you can use them however you want. Now I think one thing I want to point out in that is you'll notice that in John Smith's wallet there was nothing that was called an identity. Right? There's no artifact in that wallet that's called an identity. There are connections, and there are credentials, and there are the receipts that show him what he shared. Those are the three things that John Smith deals with. There are no keys. He's not dealing with public keys and what's my key address and it doesn't do any of that. Connections, credentials, receipts. Those are the artifacts he deals with. And people know about those. We all know about connections. We all know about credentials. Those are common things for people to do. So Kim, in his paper, at the conclusion said this: as users, we need to see our various identities as part of an integrated world which nonetheless respects our need for independent context. So John Smith can pick what credentials he wants to use to prove things to Sky Airlines. He can use that Sky Airlines credential for other things if he wants. He's able to make all of those choices himself, and that's why we call this self-sovereign identity, because he's making his own choices. Yes? How do we what?
How do you log in?
There's no login.
No login.
There's no login. Usernames, passwords, all gone. So when John Smith shows back up at Sky Airlines, they already have a connection with him, and they know it's him. Right? So let me illustrate that with a story. So when John Smith, this demo didn't show it, but it's possible for John Smith and Sky Airlines to use this connection to actually talk to each other. Like I said, they've exchanged public keys. So now they have a mutually authenticated communications channel. How many of you have seen the movie Batman? So Batman has a bat phone, right? Remember the bat phone? He uses the bat phone to call up Commissioner Gordon. When Batman calls up Commissioner Gordon doesn't say, I'm not sure this is Batman. Can you tell me your date of birth? What's the answer to your first security question? What street did you live on when you were 13? Commissioner Gordon doesn't ask Batman that. If somebody's calling on the bat phone, it's Batman. There's nobody else that can call on the bat phone. Same thing's true here. When John Smith shows up at Sky Airlines, he doesn't have to log in because there is nobody else who can talk to Sky Airlines on that channel but John Smith. Or somebody who has his device. That's a different question, right? Yeah. So that is a different question, and there's a whole paper on the Sovereign website about what happens if I lose my phone and all of that. So that's out of scope for what we want to talk about tonight, but that is an important question to answer. Yeah. Okay, so just briefly, privacy is important. This is about self-sovereign identity. Privacy and control are two sides of the same coin. You don't have control if you don't have privacy. You don't have privacy if you don't have control. So the system is private by design, designed to reduce correlation, uses zero-knowledge proofs for minimal disclosure. It's designed to ensure that people's privacy is protected. And so that's all of my contact information. I'm Windley on Twitter. I blog at windley.com. I have an unusual last name, and I'm an early adopter, so I almost always get my last name as a username. So anyway, happy to take questions online. I think we're going to do a panel now, right? So good.
So go to Mandy.com, and then 656738. We're going to start with the first question. If you could both explain your company's size and what the ambitions are and what like the road ahead is.
The size of Tykn, we're huge. we're actually 4 full-time employees, and yeah, we're based in The Hague. The ambition is to lead the digital identity space in the impact industry, and make sure that identities are portable, private, and secure. One of our also short-term ambitions is to lead the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, into this digital revolution space, simply because we are from the region, we speak Arabic, we speak the language of those people who live in that area, and we're able to explain to them in a simple and easy manner what are the benefits of leapfrogging from basically paper-based into self-sovereign.
Am I still mic'd? Do I?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, okay. So Sovereign Foundation is a nonprofit organization. We have about 5 full-time employees and probably another dozen part-time employees. The overall size of the Sovereign ecosystem is fairly big. We have almost 70 stewards who run nodes on the network. Last year in 2018, we had almost 20,000 commits from over 160 independent developers in the open source project. Dozens of companies who are working with Sovereign, including Tykn. Tykn's one of our stewards, so very happy for that.
Well, please, we need a mic. Otherwise, people can't.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Are you already working together?
Yes.
Cooperating?
Yes. So
Yeah.
Tykn is a sovereign steward, which means that they run one of our nodes, and as Tey said when he spoke, that they're using Sovereign underneath their app to make things. Essentially, they're using the identity meta system I described to build a context-specific identity system for their particular use case. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Let's then tap into the next question, and has to do with your answer. So there's always a weakest link. That's a question. And what would that be? And why is Sovereign built on a permission blockchain? And maybe one has to do with the other. So,
Yeah.
question for both.
I think the weakest link in any system that humans use is always the human, right? It's always the person who's going to make some mistake somewhere. One of the things that I think you noticed in my talk early on was an identity meta system needs to provide a common user experience, not a common user interface, but a common user experience. So if you think about the web, for example, you can pick up almost any browser, you know how to use it because there's a common user experience. That reduces human error. It helps people make correct choices. So you're never going to eliminate that completely, but you can do things to help with that. The question of permission blockchain. So there's, early on, we had significant worries about scalability and cost. So in particular, I mentioned that we want to protect users' privacy, and part of that is to reduce correlatability. Reducing correlatability means that you need to give people a unique identifier for every relationship they had. So in John Smith's case, he had 4 connections. He had 4 different identifiers, not one. There's no such, I like to say that a universal identifier is a 20th century solution that doesn't have any business solving problems in the 21st century. Universal identifiers are way too dangerous in a computer age. And so we create different identifier for every person. Early on, we believed that those identifiers were going to be written to the blockchain, and so the cost of that, particularly as we tried to imagine how it would be used, for example, cases like Tey's doing with refugees, was just too high. And so permission blockchain allowed us to keep that cost low and to be able to scale it. Turns out now all the DIDs are, or most of the DIDs are exchanged peer-to-peer, so we don't necessarily have the same cost question. However, you'll note, for example, that just last week Microsoft announced Ion, which is a side tree-based system that sits on top of Bitcoin for doing DIDs. That's because Bitcoin was never designed to do DIDs, right? And so they had to go to a lot of work to be able to use Bitcoin for DIDs. So a lot of different reasons. There's no particular reason why you have to have a permissioned blockchain. I could imagine some DIDs being rooted in permissionless blockchains and working just fine.
The question that pops up a lot is why and how zero knowledge proof is being exactly implemented in the system, and how do you use certain tools for that? Kind of credentials or characteristics.
Yeah. So in the example I gave with John Smith, when John Smith shared data out of his 3 credentials with Sky Airlines, that was done using a zero knowledge proof. He didn't share the entire credential from his bank and his telco and his driver's license. He just shared the information that was on the screen using a zero knowledge proof. That's important for minimal disclosure. It's also important for system efficiency. I mean, if we were worried about disclosure, his bank probably wouldn't give him a bank statement because it might have his account number in it. And now if he's going to use it to prove something to somebody, he's going to share his account information with people. So it causes all kinds of problems. So zero knowledge proofs solve those problems. I don't know the exact details. It is based on the ABC for Trust anonymous credential work, but obviously there's been a lot of work on that.
The Dutch government, you work with them a lot, right? In what ways, and could you explain a bit more about how exactly?
We do some collaborations with the Dutch government, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, in various ways, whether it's being judges on a hackathon, which I did together with my co-founder in Den Haag, where the Ministry of Justice had a hackathon on how can blockchains and how can emerging technology help in confiscating assets and confiscating value. Other ways is by doing workshops together with people from the ministry on emerging standards in identity, and how would basically also criminals can use self-sovereign identity in the Dutch sphere. Of course, there is many coalitions, the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, Brightlands, and many other initiatives that are all focusing on how can the Dutch government benefit from such a technology. Bureaucracy is definitely a killer of the innovation in this space, but I think the slow and steady steps, they help protect you guys, first of all, and help bring a sound and scalable technology to the country. So our role simply is more of an educator, and we take the hands of regulators and slowly walk them through the ABCs of the blockchain, cryptos, and digital currencies.
What are the costs being involved? So for you as a user of the Sovereign platform, and for the foundation itself?
For us, the costs are definitely much lower than what the Sovereign Foundation has to go through. In the early days, our costs were limited to the server capacity that we needed to run the node on. The costs are definitely spiking up when you want to scale up the team, get developers, get DevOps, get technical team leaders, front-end UX that is related to the industry, whether it's blockchain or cryptocurrencies. So I think human capital today is the most expensive cost in any startup or in any blockchain-spaced entity. And my call would be for you also, if you know in your network or if you are looking for a next gig, we have some positions open at Tykn. Please take a look at our website.
That's good. So I actually interpreted your question a little differently, so maybe I'm not answering it right, but the cost of using Sovereign is actually fairly low I mentioned British Columbia and Ontario, for example, who had written to the ledger 7 times to write those 2 credential definitions. That's about $60 worth of transactions. So for $60 of transactions, they've issued 10 million credentials. So the cost of using Sovereign is fairly low. In the case of Tykn, for example, as a steward, they are running one of the nodes, so they do have some expense there, and that is part of what they do to help support the Sovereign community. Other people do other things. We have other organizations who donate to our nonprofit foundation, or other means of showing support. But that's basically what we do to run the foundation.
And there's no gas involved because we've got
There's no gas. We do charge a transaction fee for writing to the ledger, and that's primarily to prevent spam. It's like I said, it's not very large. It's just enough to dissuade somebody from trying to create a denial of service attack, for example.
In a more wider sense, adoption. So what is in the way of adoption right now to go mainstream with this? What are the biggest hurdles?
Yeah, the hurdles are many, to be honest. If we want to scale, and we want to scale up fast, especially from the impact perspective, we look at creating impact on the short term and not 5 to 10 years from now. The number one hurdle again today is the education. So why would I use a self-sovereign ID, or why would a government or an institution go on that path? Why would we innovate? Why would we invest in such a new domain? Obvious for us, it is obvious why we need to do it, but unfortunately for the other party, it is obvious when they are hacked, breached, or leaked, or something happens to them, and then they would know, I could have avoided this problem. Second hurdle is is again the lack of talent. It is not easy today to find developers or architects or software engineers that understand how the technology works, and who have also the expertise in the identity space. The identity space usually was, and is still today, a very niche market, and mostly it is by governments or large institutions that work with governments who have this pool of talent. Similar to what we saw in the cryptocurrency early times of Bitcoin. If you want to get someone who understands money and the transactions and stocks and bonds and how to do digital assets, you have to get him from a bank. But today we are seeing more and more individuals, more and more independent people studying money and studying the history of money and the future of money by themselves. So we need time to transition to that space where we can find talent, and at the same time the problem owners understand that there is a huge added value if we use SSIs.
Yeah, so the story... Yeah,
Second, please.
I think everybody can understand if I speak loud. No? Okay. Thank you. I really like the idea you're trying to come up with an identifier system for refugees. There's so many importance with so many governments, institutions to help to have this today.
Yeah.
This is huge. So you should be supported by zillions of money and every help you can get in the world, right? Or am I wrong?
I think you're somehow correct. So looking at the age of Tykn and where we started from, today we're sitting next to the chairman of Sovereign. So that speaks on the level of awareness and the brand positioning of Tykn itself. We have closed a investment round recently, and it was published in the news. We are winning almost every award that is out there last year and this year, but that is not enough. The risk is not from the refugee side, the risk is from the institution side. This is a threatening technology for their work, for their existence, and for the amount of money and funds that they can get. So today, when I come with a proposition to an NGO or to a non-profit organization or even to a for-profit organization, and I'm telling them, I can bring transparency, I can fight fraud, I can give easy access to services, they will not like that. Because their job every year is to increase their budgets and collect more money, either from taxpayers or donors or the impact funds. So this is where the clash happens. And until we are able to bring a value proposition that benefits their needs, the refugees' needs, and Tykn as a for-profit organization, then we can see that scale-up moment going on. But we are there. There's friction, yeah.
Yeah. There must be really governments that are, thankful that you come up with a solution and helping them to solve their problems, because you're actually solving a lot of problems. So it should be more a matter of how quickly can you roll out this solution. Yeah?
Okay, guys, let's leave this with the drinks and move forward. So we got 2 more questions for this session. It's totally different than the one you got right now. The governance model. So how do you decide if verification is correct? That's the most liked question, actually.
So you mean how does the verifier know that the credential is correct?
And how the Sovereign itself is being governed.
So Sovereign is governed by the Sovereign Governance Framework. We've put a lot of work into developing that. Probably over 40 people participated in the working group that created the governance framework. You can find it online if you go to sovereign.org. There's a tab called Governance. You'll see that it's quite well developed. Some people have called it a model for how these kind of projects ought to be governed. It says how we run the network, and it's designed to not only talk about the principles that we think are important, but also provide policies which support those principles and guide not only the foundation, but stewards and others in working on the network so that those principles are followed. So that's the importance of the governance framework, and that's really that's what makes that bottom layer work. Is that's why whether it's Tykn working with credentials for refugees, or the government of British Columbia doing business registrations, or Novartis doing they all want that bottom layer to have certain behavior, and that's what the governance framework does.
And how do you then determine, Tey looks very trustworthy, but if all the stewards actually are, so how is that being checked?
So part of the governance framework describes the capabilities we want out of stewards. As you mentioned earlier, it is a permissioned ledger, but even though the ledger is permissioned, we believe that the system is decentralized, not only because of the decentralized credential exchange that I mentioned earlier, but also because we try very hard to create censorship resistance. So the 70 or so stewards that I mentioned earlier are spread out among 6 different continents. So we haven't found anybody to run a node in Antarctica yet, but we really want to. that and we want diversity in size, we want diversity in industry, we want diversity in countries, so that we don't have a censorship problem. There are requirements that they have to meet in order to become a steward, and there is a steward qualification committee that's defined by the governance framework that says how those stewards are actually selected. They have to sign an agreement which says that they'll abide by the governance framework, and if they're found doing something that is against the governance framework or against the network, then they can be kicked off, with an adjudication process to allow them to appeal. But ultimately, that's the role of governance, is to choose those nodes.
Thanks.
Yeah, and on top of what Phil was talking about, from our experience, is reputation is very important. When any company, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, decides to misuse the powers that it has been given to identify people. And we've seen many international NGOs fall in the trap of their employees misbehaving, and it is affecting the brand that they represent, and with that it affects the money and the funds these NGOs receive. So reputation and being on a public blockchain, being on a public ledger, on a global worldwide ledger, that means there is accountability at a very high level, and there is no more things done in dark rooms, and it is direct, you can spot it directly. So combining reputation with accountability, then we are able to achieve a very high standard of transparency and good at the same time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned accountability, because even though the Sovereign Ledger is permissioned, it is public. Meaning anybody can go in, they can look at the transactions, they can look at the behavior of the stewards and hold them to account if something is not right.
Questions keep on coming in, so I think for the drinks we have a lot to discuss still. Is there anything that you guys would like to wrap it up with? Maybe like a final note? Up to you.
Yeah. I guess I would probably wrap it up with, earlier there was a question about adoption. And I think, we're all blockchain people here, we all want to change the world. We believe decentralization is the way to do that. But we can't do that without adoption, right? We can build the coolest things in the world, but if we don't get people to use them, we're not actually going to change much. And that is something that's very important to us, is finding ways to get adoption. It's one of the reasons why our steward pool is important, but also the other people who are using the network, because people follow each other, right? They see, oh, I see British Columbia doing something, so maybe I should try that. And that's, I think the early adoption is going to be internal use cases, people doing things that they control both sides of. But eventually what we're going to have is network effects, where people see credentials being used and realize that they could use those same credentials for something else. One of the things that I'm really excited about is this year the credit unions plan to issue 1 million credentials for, they call MyCUID. That'll put 1 million credentials in the hands of people. But that's not 1 million spread out around the world. It's going to be about 12 credit unions. They're regional. We'll get some concentration of credentials, and we're really hoping that we'll see some small network effects kick in and be able to see how that adoption plays out.
Yeah, I've already talked about the importance of privacy, and I do believe we don't need to wait for Sovereign to be scalable and global and the credentials in your hands, guys, to think about your privacy. You can think about your privacy right now. The moment you go back to your homes and families, think on how can you improve your protection standards on your own data. Whether it's every time you log in a website, change the cookie settings into basic and don't give all your information away. whether it is how you use Facebook, Instagram, and all these social media platforms, because today the number one threat for our democracies is our data, and these centralized institutions that are basically just mining this information and using it for their own purposes and their own agendas. Keep in mind, the road to self-sovereign identity just started. We're at very early stages. We're like, today I compare it to the 1973 when the first internet came out, when the first TCP/IP protocol came out. People were thinking, what can we do with this? And in 2020 is the mimic of 1973 when we start thinking of self-sovereign identity. So no one has an idea of what the killer app will be. No one has an idea of where can we implement it. Personally, we lived in a certain environment, in a certain problem, deep-rooted the issue of paper-based IDs. We came to this room here together with my co-founder, and we pitched, and we won, and it was a long journey. And we still didn't start even yet. We don't have a demo to show you. But that doesn't mean you guys cannot do it. In your workplace, in your communities, always push for privacy, always push for security, and learn about self-sovereign identities, not only sovereign, about any type of technology that is claiming to bring self-sovereign identities for everyone. It is important for your future, for the future of your children, and any small action that you can take will definitely can change the course of your life and the lives around you. When I was in the asset, say in Zeist, many of the refugees were telling me, go to the startup weekend. I said, no, I'm not going. Nobody would be listening to how blockchains can change academic certificates. And I came, and we won. And I met my co-founder, I met my other co-founder, and the ball rolled until living from 57 euros in a week to raising 1.2 million euros in a matter of 12 months. Yeah, that's a big achievement, at least from me, from what I see it. And similar to you guys, you can also do that. I think you have a much better position than the position I was in to do something. And take this digital identity, because that's the future. I told you before, the largest economy on earth is not the US, it's not Netherlands, it's not China, it is the internet. And the most visited place on earth is not the red light district, it's the internet. So the internet is, as Phil said, is missing the identity layer. Today we can move millions and trillions of money, and we can move a 100 million fraction of a cent over the internet without a bank, without a financial institution. And that's a major milestone for human civilization, because the first communication, what we did as humans, was communicating value. And now the next revolution that we're gonna see after communication, after money, is identity. Now, how are we going to bring self-sovereign identity in a scalable mode? I have no answer for that. But I know Bitcoin did it, and I know the internet did it in the communication. So I think someone in this room might have the answer for a scalable self-sovereign identity.
Cool, let's get some drinks.